for decades. Julia Grosso from Vancouver to win it for Canada. Canada came. Canada conquered. Canada gold at Tokyo 2020.
You're listening to the Northern Football Podcast, your home for everything Canadian soccer, with Brendan Dunlop, Alex Gangué-Ruzic, and here's your host, Ben Steiner.
Hey there, folks, and welcome back into the Northern Football Podcast. Ben Steiner alongside Alex Gangué-Ruzic and Brendan Dunlop, as always. Episode 198 here on Northern Football, and it's the post-match edition after Canada was back on their home turf, even though, the turf was not so good. They get a 2-1 win against Panama, and it was exciting. It was weird to be, the only one of us three, and, Peter's not even in the media anymore, so it was really just the only NFP representation, which was a little bit weird at the game. But what do you guys think of the game, and how do you guys take it in?
Sorry to leave you alone there, buddy, but at least you were inside. At least you weren't out in the external media deck to brave the elements like the Voyagers and the masses.
You're all grown up now, too.
I will say I was in the first row of the press box, and it was cold. There was a draft. It was significantly colder in the first row of the press box. Now, this is complaining about things that shouldn't be complained about. But it's significantly colder in the first row.
Crazy. Yeah, I still remember when he was back there in the third row trying to look around a pole, and I didn't hear much complaining back then. Just happy to be in the building. And big time now.
Honestly. Crazy. Just fiending for popcorn.
I was still behind a pole.
Right behind him, and he still couldn't get it. Yikes. Yeah, we're going to put that on a t-shirt, Ben. A front row, and it was, it was a good view, but it was cold. Back to row 3.
That's what I did after the match. When I was doing my write-up, I moved back to row 3 alongside Tom and Canadian Soccer Daily, who had also moved back there because it was warmer. It was probably 10 degrees colder in the first row than the third row.
Okay, pull Tom Nightingale into it. The guy who left England because the weather was bad to move to Canada. Yeah, okay, pull them into it.
Alex, how'd you take in the game last night?
It's great. I watched it at BC Place, and press box there's great. Had a great view, front row, not cold. Honestly, maybe it was just it was like a protest of where the game really should have been. Now, jokes aside, it was good to see 23K on BMO. It sounded great in the audio, and good just to be back in Canada and enjoy that match.
It was nice that it was 23K, and it was nice that it was, it wasn't the best football weather, but it also wasn't as bad as it can be in Canada in October, whether you're in Alberta or whether you're in Toronto. The weather still allowed for the potential for a good football match. The pitch, a little less so, which was the surprise, because to be honest, I even after seeing calling TFC against the Red Bulls and seeing the pitch against Miami, I didn't actually think it would still kind of be as bad as it was. But I like Jesse Marsh's comments afterwards. Is like, look, like that doesn't matter. We're not going to make that excuse. If anything, it's this baptism by fire that they went through the Copa is over. So it's great that they had another challenge to affect the way he wants them to play. Which is something I didn't consider going into it. And, looking at opposition like that who have intentions of being at the World Cup every year when it was just 3.5 or 4 Concacaf spots, let alone the expanded 8, which doesn't include the 3 hosts for the next World Cup. I thought they showed pretty well. I thought it was good. They matched up against their physicality. I liked some of the changes that Jesse Marsh made. Cool for Kwasi Poku to get 90 seconds and call himself a Canadian international. I think he'll get some more opportunities. And overall, just good to have Jesse Marsh experience Canadian home cooking as a Canadian men's national team head coach officially.
I am worried, though, weather and pitch for November at BMO Field, but maybe that's a conversation for later down the road.
You think they're talking about moving?
No, I don't think they will. I just think it could
they've sold
play a
tickets
factor,
already.
Especially now that they drew Suriname. They drew the longest away day in Concacaf. So that whole 2-legged series from going all the way to hot Suriname, pretty South America pretty much, then all the way up to cold BMO in November. It's quite the logistical undergoing.
I have a suspicion there would be an option for them to relocate and blame the pitch and still cash in on revenue and not grossly inconvenience everybody. I didn't look at the schedule as I say this, but doing it at Tim Hortons Field, if you are taking some money from Canada Soccer or some leniency from Canada Soccer because of the, the unspoken, well, we're paying Jesse Marsh's wage bill here. I could see Pelly and MLSE prioritizing the pitch ahead of the season. And if that's something that they could lay or do this work, they wouldn't let a One Canada game, I think, get in the way of that. If there was an alternative that worked out, and that wouldn't be the worst case scenario.
Yeah,
I also could see Marsh advocating for that. Like I could see Marsh pushing for that. Right.
I find it interesting how bad the pitch at BMO Field can be, considering it's not 100% real grass. Like it is supposed to be more durable than how it's looked. And I was, walking on the pitch after the Miami game, and it was bad. Like it was community park. Whoa.
You walked on the pitch? What do you mean you walked on the pitch?
Where? They walked us down
the middle of the pitch?
Down the sideline. They walked us down to the away locker room for the Miami
sideline
availability.
Doesn't count. You can't say on the pitch.
Okay. You can't. Yeah. If you're walking where the lines person is with the flag, like that's not, you didn't get the pitch experience.
I was looking right at it, and it looked like Dunbar Community Park where I grew up.
The surprising thing to me about that pitch is that it's not the middle that's run down. It's not the 6-yard boxes that are mud pits like the 80s. It's this weird part of the sideline that isn't even
football
where
benches.
The football line would be. It's just the bench walk. It's crazy.
That's why it doesn't even seem like the Argos make much impact on it in terms of the quality of the pitch.
Their starters don't, but maybe their bench guys do. But it definitely feels like football is the big surface, because it's true. Because the hybrid pitch at BMO used to be like, the reputation it had was incredible. But it feels like ever since the Argos have been there, and maybe they kind of underestimated sort of wear and tear football could have on it, and you see it across the world, especially because the reality is, even if a football team plays on grass, it's two different kinds of grass. You see it whenever they play games in the Premier League, and like Tottenham Hotspur Stadium gets absolutely chewed up the next week for their Premier League game. It is a big question mark.
Enough about the pitch, though. No excuses about the pitch. Canada still goes out and wins the game. Jonathan David and Kyle Larin both score in the same game for the first time under Jesse Marsh. Kyle Larin finally scores and, maybe shut us up, at least me up, with, my doubts on Kyle Larin and Jonathan David at points, of course, who's been on fire since I said that I didn't really care that he was going to be scoring for Lille if he didn't deliver with the national team. Not so nice in the 69th minute.
Keep saying it so that he keeps scoring.
Not so nice in the 69th minute from Jose Fajardo. More disappointment for Fajardo at BMO Field, which I think Brendan would appreciate. But
there's the
overall,
CFL
probably
he hinted. Should have known.
It was the first thing that came to mind after Fajardo scored, and I could only think of Cody Fajardo. But
and me, apparently, which I appreciate. I love being the Portuguese version of Mathieu Chinetti, the two football guy. I like that. I'll take that.
You just need Mathieu Chinetti's shoes, though.
I would have different shoes. I've thought about this many times, guys. What, for me, I have to go full in on the Euro, right? So I either get Dunlop trainers, like all white Dunlop trainers, and I get someone to custom them up, or I go super Euro and like Diodoras or Asics.
Go for the Ferraris, man. The red Ferraris. Just an insane model of shoe.
The Pumas?
Yeah, the Puma Ferrari ones, the red ones. Absolute speed demons.
I got a red, actually the most expensive sneaker maybe that I've ever bought. I miscalculated the conversion for Qatari Rial when I was over there. I thought I was getting a sweet deal, and then I looked at my bill and I'm like, damn, those shoes cost me $235. I thought it was probably closer to like $150. I got some Addy Zeros, the Air Runner ones are, and they were all red, and I wore those to do the Canada games at the World Cup. I thought it made the casual outfit a little more tip top.
And overall, thoughts on Larin finally scoring under Jesse Marsh, which he had struggled in terms of actually finding the back of the net recently.
Yeah, I was happy to see it. I mean, for the two of them, I think we all know that they hadn't reached their potential at Copa, and that's what's frustrating. And understandably, while Alex and I disagree with your point about being frustrated that he scores boatloads for a club but can't do it for country, I totally know where that comes from, and we've shared that feeling in moments. Just doesn't feel like there's a better option, or the urgency to make a change. So it was great to see it work for the two of them against the opposition. I think is very competitive and a good measurement for them now as they prepare next for the Gold Cup, and they're kind of building through into this next phase, this half cycle that they're in and building for 26. Larin's a guy that needs to keep scoring to keep his place, I think. David is someone that you just want to see continue to grow and be more and more dynamic, and you kind of got both of that against fairly competitive opposition.
Yeah, I think if you're talking Larin, David, you have to start with David, because for me, David continues to grow every game under Jesse Marsch. His form's incredible. Like, forget best 9 in Concacaf. Like, that's not been in doubt for a while. I think Jonathan David, the way he's playing, you're having to talk best player in CONCACAF. I'd put him right up against, well, right now it's Christian Pulisic, and I like what David's been doing in bigger games, and it for Canada as well. And this was an example of it. Like, David, every game now, he's scored three goals and has 1 assist in his last 4 games for Canada. He's scored 4 of 8 of the goals that Canada has scored under Jesse Marsch. He's integral to what Jesse Marsch does. You see it on the ball. You see it with his running. You see it with his pressing. Off the ball, he was exceptional last night. The way he was dropping into midfield, taking these touches, turning. He was just controlling the game. It was like a true number 10. And that's exciting, because that's not even what he's a striker who scores some pretty nice goals, and he's giving you all that. And I think that's great, because I think there was no doubt in the summer, Jonathan David is the future of this team in the attack, and they need to build around it. What I'm most intrigued about, what I've been excited to kind of see, and you saw it especially in this game, and this was a huge worry we had. I mean, I outlined during the summer that I thought Kyle Larin and Jonathan David, the biggest issue I had is that they were getting in each other's way. And I'll have to say, credit has to be given to Jesse Marsch. Credit has to be given to Kyle Larin, because they've sat down, they've figured it out. And Kyle Larin isn't getting in Jonathan David's way anymore. They've figured out where to be on the pitch, how to position themselves, and that's really helped Larin too. Like, you saw it in this game, he kept finding his own spaces that were maybe not the same spaces David were picking up, but he got into the box a few times. He scored his goal. Beautiful to see him score. First time finish, the Larin we were used to seeing for Canada. And I thought overall his complete game was just solid. He was good on the press as he's been. He was good off the ball. And I think now that you can see the potential of Larin and David playing together and not getting in each other's way, that's exciting for me, because that offers you more flexibility. You're not looking at Larin as a hindrance to David, but instead someone who can compete and give you something different alongside David. And I think that's an option that Marsch has been long waiting for.
I was thinking about that, watching them spatially. Sorry, Ben. And I wondered how much of it had to do with the lineup being a little different than what we saw at Copa. Kone wasn't there. Ahmed and Schaffelberg were starting. Does that allow Larin to be in different positions where they're not getting in each other's way? When you have a Tejan out there, when you have a Kone out there, particularly a Kone who's taking up more and more of the pitch offensively in ways that Staccu doesn't always do. Like, I wondered if that sample size that we got against Panama was an accurate enough sample size, because of the other guys that weren't in the lineup, and the guys that were, Alex.
I would say no, just because, with David and Larin, I felt that Copa was always them getting into each other's way. I didn't find Kone was really getting in the way of anything they were trying to do. The other players, Buchanan, really just felt like David and Larin, whenever David would get the ball, he'd look and Larin would be right beside him. He'd almost be like, what are you doing here? Like, you're supposed to be over there. And there'd be other moments where there was a moment in Argentina game where they literally ran into each other. And that was kind of like, all right, guys, there's obviously something spatially going wrong. So I think it's as much just the two figuring out. That's why I wonder if it was Marsch sitting them down and kind of being like, look, here's some clips of where you guys are in games. Obviously this is where you probably should be. This is where you should be. Or if it was maybe even Larin and David speaking, like, all right, like, we've played with each other a lot. What's not working right now? What's not clicking? Because it does feel like it happened before, because Larin had, against US, for example, last month, he was excellent. He just missed 2 big chances, right? Like, other than the 2 big chances he missed, he scores one. He finally scores one in this game. And that kind of makes a lot of the feel of his performance a little different.
One of the parts that kind of stood out to me was just how versatile that they looked in attack with that partnership, but also how the wingers integrated into that when they were in possession. Because when the ball would, go over to the right side of the pitch, you'd often see them kind of float differently. And sometimes, David would swap over sides and allow, Larin to press higher and David would drop back. And then they were able to work from that. And oftentimes you'd see, Davies even push over or those wide players push in more inside and maybe into, more attacking positions. And I just found the fluidity of that, especially when they were in possession out wide, was a lot different than we've seen before with that partnership. Whereas a lot of the time they would, who would press, who would drop back, the two of them would kind of step on their feet going up front. They didn't necessarily know what to do with the winger or with the wing back. And this time it just worked. And the press looked like it worked. It looked like it was balanced, and it looked like they had a plan, whether it was on the right, left, or in the center of the pitch.
I think I have an answer to that, and this was kind of my point and my curiosity with Alex about how the positions or the other people that were on the pitch in other positions had kind of influenced David and Larin getting each other's way. Because I think having Richie Laryea there with Ali Ahmed in front of him allows for much more dynamism on both sides of the pitch. Because I do find that Alphonso Davies and Laryea are often, I don't want to say on the same page, but it does seem like they are two guys who have played together for a long time and read each other's thoughts and can anticipate each other's space in ways that allow for that fluidity, which wasn't always the case that we saw in Copa, isn't always the case with Alistair Johnson, and it's not a shot at him at all. I just think that there's a different type of chemistry that with the three of them, Ali Ahmed being the other one, as opposed to Tejan, that allows for more of that, which we saw last night.
It's going to be interesting to see what Tajon Buchanan is like coming back into this group, because of course, this recent run of games hasn't included Tajon Buchanan. He's a player that you want to have included, given the quality that he has, given the level that he should be playing at when he returns. But this whole plan has not been necessarily around Tajon Buchanan. Because he just hasn't been available. So it's going to be interesting to see what he looks like. And of course, we'll get an idea of what potentially he looks like and the rest of this men's national team, because they're taking on Suriname in the Concacaf Nations League. Of course, they didn't get through this round of the Concacaf Nations League last year, but taking on Suriname, it harkens back to 2022 World Cup qualifying when we were all scared about Suriname and all their dual nationals and players they were able to bring
t-shirts over. Remember when we were scared about Suriname?
Need to get that
was
made,
certainly
for sure.
Certainly experience being scared about Suriname. I remember Alex, Sam Rowan, and I did a live stream before the Suriname match, and it was our most viewed live stream because all the Suriname fans were, absolutely hyped about playing Canada, which at that point was so unproven.
1,000%. They thought it was the game.
They saw
it. That too.
Like, oh, you guys, one of you guys can pronounce our Dutch names correctly? Yeah, we'll stick around for a minute. I can see that.
Yeah, my Dutch isn't great.
Thoughts on going up against Suriname?
I mean, this got Canadian ties all over it with Aaron Vinter. Was he the sporting director, the head of football for Suriname now? Former Toronto FC head coach Aaron Vinter.
I didn't even realize that, but
yeah, he's got a executive role. He's not the manager, obviously. He's got an executive role in putting that together and recruiting some elite second and third division Dutch players that have some Surinamese ancestry. It's amazing to see, I think, Suriname back at this stage and bring back some of the feelings like afraid of that potential banana skin, as the Brits love to say for those types of opposition. I feel as though both of these squads are worlds apart from where they were 3 years ago, and I think for Canada there's always the potential there for a slip up, as we say when Mexico or the United States play teams that they're supposed to beat as well. But it's exciting that Canada's in such a different position now where there will be no fear of Suriname taking the game to Canada, which was a legit fear based on how they played in qualifying the group stages before, 3 years ago in 2021. So yeah, I'm happy that it's not Jamaica again. I'm happy that it's somebody new and somebody different, because these are all micro tests in some type of way for Marsh's system and Marsh's players.
Yeah, well, I think also we have to remember 2021 was just fear of the unknown, right? It was just you didn't really know what to expect from Suriname. It's also the pressure. It was literally like one game win or lose, right? Whereas at least this time there's 2 legs. If you have a disaster of a first leg, you still got 90 minutes to clean it up at home. Like there's just so much more in control. Although I do want to say, I think this is, if you're Canada, what's nice, it's a good matchup. Like I'm looking at this Suriname team and you look at their squad, like they're still a team that's obviously building a long-term project to qualify for World Cups. There's, they're continuing to get in these dual nationals. Geraldo Becker, I think, he's a good player who you can put him up against a lot of top attackers in this region in terms of, what he's done at Union Berlin and now at Real Sociedad. Like this squad is good, but what's nice for Canada is that now with the progress they've made, they want to be a top team in CONCACAF. Really, they could have been matched up against Costa Rica for this. And I still think they're heading into this confident, thinking they're going to get the job done across 2 legs. But I guess it depends on your perspective, because based on how the table looked a few days ago, they easily could have been playing a Guatemala in this game, a Nicaragua, and you're probably sitting there thinking, oh, that's a cakewalk, and you're all right, maybe a little more nervous for a Suriname versus one of those 2 teams. But it's also nice because for Canada, you get maybe a bit more of a test than you would have, but you still head into it favored and wanting to make a statement, especially after how last year went against Jamaica.
And we'll jump into the questions now as well. From Dan Clark at Dan Clark 999. How big of a deal is it that Poku got his first cap with the team after just moving from the CanPL a few months ago? Does this help legitimize players in a league as being national team caliber? I don't think it necessarily does, and that's not just because it's throwaway seconds that he got, and I don't think he touched the ball in his debut. And it's nice to see that he came on with Joe Waterman, and there was all the romanticism about the 2 CPL players coming on. But Joel Waterman is at most a depth player on this team, regardless of how he's playing for CF Montreal. There's, center backs, very much the first choice center backs on this team are Cornelius and Bombito. And, Bombito played outstanding last night. And I don't necessarily see the ceiling completely different for Kwasi Poku. I think if he comes up, he'll be, a depth striker for this team. Yes, he's young. He could potentially grow into, the next striker that takes over for Canada. But I just don't necessarily see it yet. I don't know what it is necessarily. I don't know the specific, but I just don't see the players from the CPL, at least that are coming out now, even the ones that have made recent transfers, as being impact players on the national team kind of in the next 2-3 years leading into the World Cup.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's not a bad thing, though. I just got to say, Brandon, go ahead. It's not a bad thing, though, what you're saying.
It's not a bad thing. Like, it's good that they're there, but it almost seemed like, for lack of a better term, charity minutes last night.
Yeah, I felt a little different than when Tristan Borges and Marco Carducci were called into the squad in 2019. That to me felt token. That to me felt like charity minutes, to use your term. Whether they got minutes or not, I can't remember. But you felt like there was no chance that these guys at all had a position, a chance of getting into the squad in some type of meaningful or competitive qualifying game. Kwasi Poku has, I think, the potential to be maybe not an Ike Ugbo, but for Qatar, but the Theo Bair, where you're someone talking about like he's going to get called, right? Like he deserves to get called, and all it takes is an injury or different opposition to get a chance to get a call up. And I don't think he's someone that's going to stay at Molenbeek for 10 years. We don't see that happen too often, so it seems like it's a good opportunity for him to continue to develop his game in ways that the Canadian Premier League wouldn't have afforded him. So that to me is the win. Because you look at Kyle Becker or Tristan Borges, any of these other Canadian Premier League stars that we feel like are good enough that may have got a Canadian men's national team shout 10 years ago or 15 years ago, if the league existed and the balance amongst the player pool was the way it was then. You don't see that happening with those guys that have stayed there. So being 20, being in Belgium now, Poku obviously has Marsh's eye, and I think at this stage, like that's all you really want. That's a great start.
Yeah, and where I would disagree with the sentiment with Poku is that, like, the Canadian Premier League, the goal isn't to produce national team superstars next week. Like, that's just not the goal at this moment. It's to produce players, and long term those players are going to develop and go to different leagues, and who knows, maybe down the road the Canadian Premier League will be such a destination that they won't have to leave. Who knows what the future of the league could look like way down the road. But talking short term, the goal is to move them on. So yeah, that Poku maybe isn't ready tomorrow to slot in against Suriname and lead the line isn't a bad thing. What's nice is that thanks to this platform, that maybe 5-10 years ago, had he been in the same position, he doesn't make it at TFC. Where does he go? He falls through the cracks, and then we're talking in 5-10 years. Remember that Poku kid that showed some promise and we never saw much of again? Now he's been given a platform because of the CPL. Now there's a legitimate place where someone who was playing for Forge 2 months ago came on and played for the national team last night, which I think is pretty cool and should be celebrated, because it's cool to think of the path. And what's nice is that now Poku can develop, Poku can do his thing. And if there's a possibility where in 2-3 years he is an impact contributor, great, because that's the beauty of this sport. Like Theo Bair 2 years ago, he was struggling at St. Johnston to even get minutes. And some were kind of wondering, is that a CPL player right there? Whereas the CPL team should take a look at Theo Bair from St. Johnston, start him, and he'll be a star in the CPL. Fate has it, he gets a shot at Motherwell, he scores a bunch of goals, and now he's scoring goals in Liga. We've seen so many stories of guys like that, and I think what's nice with the CPL is it just offers a different pathway for that. And I think it's great to see Poku represent what a journey could look like. And who knows what's going to happen for Poku in 3 years? Maybe he completely falls off, we never hear of him again, or in 3 years he's a starter. Either way, I think it's great that other CPL youngsters can look. And I think what's exciting is there's some more where, like, I'm looking at a Shola Jimo, I'm looking at a Grady McDonald. There's some real upside in those 16, 17-year-olds who, all right, you're looking at potential long-term impact contributors. And if it takes a Poku opening the door the same way a Marco Carducci and an Amir Didic opened the door in year one, the same way Dominic Zator opened the door, Joel Waterman, Jonathan Sirwa, great, because that's ultimately the goal down the road, is to open the door for the next generation of guys.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking about that a couple of times, but for Siwa now, someone would talk about, oh, he deserves it. He should be the third guy. James Pantemis was that for me a few years ago, who was playing on Prince Edward Island in the Island Games in the CPL, and then got his chance to be the number one guy and shined at CF Montreal. And now, is battling a 1-2 for his club with someone who's battling to be number one for Canada, and Max Crépeau. Thinking about Poku in the situation he's in now, and it's like, well, okay, yeah, he may never be a star, but to your point about having a pathway, having the opportunity to be called into camps, to be looking at taking bigger steps in Europe, I think about, and you'll hear older players say, oh man, I wish we played 10 years later, wish we were 10 years younger, when they talk exclusively about the money. I think Canadian players who are still not 30 but maybe have retired will look at the opportunities that Santiago Lopez and Poku are getting now and think, man, if I was just 10 years younger. And the two that stand out to me most, who I thought had the chance to break into the national team setup, and had a taste of it, but didn't get much of it, Michael Petrasso and Dylan Carrero. Dylan Carrero was young player of the year, Canada Soccer Young Player of the Year. I think it was 2014. I think it was in 2014, and Michael Petrasso joined CF Montreal. He's naturally a forward. Immediately, they converted him to a fullback, and then they went out and signed Bakary Sagna, and he that just derailed him. In addition to a bunch of injuries, but those are two guys who ended up having the CPL to continue their playing careers, but not to further their playing careers at the times, at the age in which they were. So yeah, it's interesting to see, in a very short span, how much the Canadian landscape has changed, right?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at a player like Dylan Carrero, that was a talented player that retired early as well, because the CPL, didn't necessarily offer that financial stability either. And so that's also something you got to look at is, whether, the financial stability is worth the pathway. Because if it's worth putting these players in, potentially less than ideal life situations, is that a route that, you should necessarily be, proud of in a sense? Like, yes, from a footballing perspective, you can be proud of it. But at this point, the salaries just aren't there. And there's a lot of players that are at that level that think they can move up, but aren't, going to be making those moves like Poku. Like Poku was a star in the CPL.
Mark Noonan and CSB recognize that, and Poku's CPL, where he starred, is very different from the CPL where Dylan Carrero was a captain and a star.
Very true.
Right? It's 6 years have passed, but it's really 2 eras already, including the pay, where I think they raised the floor for minimum salary by nearly 40%. In Noonan's first year, which I think is, says a lot about how they've professionalized the professional league even more to avoid multiple situations like that, where you have someone like Dylan Carrero who looks and says, I could have any retail manager job and be making twice as much as I'm making as a professional athlete. This doesn't feel right here.
And from Nick Spirit, why is Marsh so intent on trying out new strikers, whether it be Bear or Tani or now Poku? Shouldn't he be more consistent on finding depth at wing or midfield? Wouldn't have not made more sense to see if Lopez could spell Ahmed? I don't mind it. Who your first choice partnership is up top, so you can kind of toy around with who that second choice is. And there is some pretty solid depth in the other areas, like midfield. Like, we've seen Mathieu Choiniere in the last couple windows with Kone out, so that's an option there. We've seen, Azorio playing that role, that's an option there. But you kind of know at the end of the day that it's probably going to be Eustáquio and Kone because, that's the option that's there. And you look at the wings and it's kind of similar depth chart as well. And I see just now on Twitter, Alex and I were tagged to build a Canadian, depth chart of what things look like, all the way down for the Canadian national team picture. And I know Alex has tracked that for a number of years as well. But I think that's why, striker is a position that you can toy around with.
Yeah, no, I mean, for that, I think one thing it's important to remember, especially though about guys getting their debuts, a lot of this stuff we don't see. Like, look, I'm not going to pretend like I wouldn't have loved to see Santiago Lopez last night. He didn't. I don't think he dressed. He wasn't listed in the roster. But also, Jesse Marsh is in a position where, of course, he rewarded these guys with this call-up, but he also said it, like, they'll see the field if they earn the chance to see the field. And I imagine, knowing how Jesse Marsh operates, like, let's be real, if he's looking at guys he wanted to get on the field yesterday, Santiago Lopez was probably priority number 1, given, Mexico's lurking, and priority number 2 is Jamie Knight-Labelle, since Wales has shown interest. But as circumstance had it, as fate had it, Poku gets the opportunity. I imagine Poku, earned that look with his work throughout training. It also helps that, maybe Poku is a forward just because you can throw him on later in the game. And, maybe it's less of a risk than throwing a Knight-Labelle in, like, hey, 2-1 game against Panama. We need to win. Go out there and good luck, kid. Like that also would have been quite the introduction to the senior national team. So I think it's also as much circumstance, because I think Marsh will no doubt want to be looking at depth at other positions, but I also think he's done a good job. Like on the wing, it's a legitimate battle, I think, when everyone's healthy on both wings, of Schaffelberg versus Liam Miller, because Liam Miller comes in, gets an assist, has a great performance. And then Ahmed versus Buchanan is going to be a great battle when Buchanan's back and healthy. And I think in the middle now, like you mentioned, Ben, Kone Eustáquio, well, Choiniere is making a great case for himself. Nathan Saliba, like, how good was he off the bench yesterday? And he shows a glimpse of what he can do. You can't forget what Azorio is doing. Like, Nico Seeger is lurking, and once he gets fully fit, I feel like he's going to have something to say. I think we are seeing that midfield and wing depth. So I think it's something where maybe it's not as obvious as the forwards, because we're maybe seeing more of them get an opportunity. But I do think subtle things are being done to help advance the wing and midfield depth.
Before you get to the next question, I think there are only 4 guarantees for 2026. To Ben's point earlier, the attack will be built around Jonathan David. I think that we still won't know the best position for Alphonso Davies. I think Stefan Eustáquio will be the anchor in midfield, undeniably, as long as he's healthy. And Moise Bombito and Derek Cornelius will be the center back pairing. Those are the only guarantees for 26.
I could see that. But still, that's a lot of, spaces on the team that are pretty well settled down and pretty well locked down as well. And I think that's important because that's, throughout the spine of the team for the most part. But, there's, when you look at where you're toying around with the roster at those depth positions, you're still looking at that striker position that Marsh has, kind of eyed for the last few windows.
But I would say every country, like every big country, does that. I remember the U.S. going to South Africa and going to Brazil, and it's like, ooh, who's the third guy? Like who is it behind Donovan and Dempsey? And getting excited when it was before Jossie Zardes, there was it'll come to me, Eddie Johnson. Eddie Johnson was a star in MLS, and then he had I think he'd gone to Bundesliga too to make more money at some point. There was somebody else I was thinking about, and then England is always like this, right? Like it's Harry Kane, or it was Wayne Rooney, but then you get excited by like, whoa, is it Jamie Vardy? Like, who is it? Is it Ollie Watkins? Like, who is behind it? And people get so excited about that. So I think that's a positive thing, that not only are we knowing these guys we're talking about, but that there's like multiple options, and it's not so clear cut,
and that they can make a difference. Because ultimately, as you see in tournaments, yeah, of course, heading into 2026, I think if you're Canada, you want Jonathan David to score 5 goals at that World Cup. You want Davies to be an absolute rock at the back. You want Bombito, Cornelius to be, do their thing. You want the midfield to be solid. The reality is there could be injuries. There could be form issues. There could be all sorts of things that could play up. And maybe you'll need, a Nathan Saliba to step up and have the tournament of his life in midfield, because maybe there's some injuries or or maybe he's just so good at that point he can't be ignored, or maybe there's other names that step up off the bench, right? The same way Ollie Watkins saved England this summer at the Euros with that clutch goal off the bench. Maybe for Canada in 2 to 3 years, maybe that's Theo Bair coming off the bench and scoring a big goal in a round of 16 match, or Tani Oluwase comes in and makes the difference with the big marker. The reality is, in tournament football, you see with all the big teams, you're going to need guys 1 to 23 anyways. Like it's a grind. There's so much that can happen. Injuries, suspensions too, with yellow cards, red cards that can crop up. It's so important to have depth for that. And of course, I think we also, you can't discount how important it is to have guys pushing. Like Tajon Buchanan is going to be better because Ali Ahmed's right on him right now, playing well and pushing him. Like it's going to help. It's Schaffelberg and Miller. You can see it the way they're pushing each other right now. Those two, they're both benefiting from it. The midfield is going to benefit from Saliba and Seeger and all these guys, Choiniere making noise. Now you're going to see it in the back line as more names develop, what that can do, the way Bombito's come in and change things. So that's why I would continue to echo the need for depth, because it manifests itself in so many ways.
Tani and Theo Bair competing to be Canada's Divock Origi.
What a statement that is.
And from
Put
Carlos
it on a t-shirt,
Verde,
boys.
maybe that's what we'll do for episode 200. We'll have to get all these t-shirts actually made and maybe open up an online store or something. But from Carlos Verde, why is the rest of Concacaf seemingly fallen off at the exact moment Canada is experiencing its golden generation? Panama, Honduras, even Mexico all floundering compared to what they were 10 to 20 years ago.
Oh,
I think there's a couple kind of micro theories. For the States, for example, this golden generation of talent that everyone labels, how much of that is because of the clubs they play for, and how much of that is their actual talent? Like there are some players on that team that
it's not seeming very good these days.
Just in terms of especially their depth. That's been the big thing. They've got some good players at the top: Pulisic, Musa, McKennie, Adams. But when any of those guys get injured, you see the drop off. And Canada yesterday, just not to hop in on that point, you're missing Kone and Johnson. I kind of forgot they were both missing till after the game. And whereas with the US, if you're missing a Kone Johnson equivalent, it feels like you're going from like top quality to guys who might barely crack a middling team in CONCACAF for whatever reason.
Yeah, it does feel like a big drop off when all of a sudden Joe Scally is getting like 30% of the touches. And you're like, what? What happened?
So I don't mind Scally. He's maybe a less good example, but some of the other guys are, especially up front, like the debates I see about Sargent versus, Pepe and all these guys, they're all just struggling. Haji Wright struggling to score.
Isn't Haji Wright 38?
Okay, maybe not 38. I think he's late 20s.
He's up there though. Like he might be 30. Good on him finally getting this chance, right? It's great that you get it. It's never too late, obviously. But when I think about
he's 26, by
where
the way.
Canada is now, Haji Wright's only 26.
I just had
I thought he
to
was
put
32
that. I did not believe when I saw his
26.
I had to throw that in for you.
I mean, I was exaggerating 38, but I thought legit 32, maybe 31.
Well, how old is Samuel Piette?
29.
Oh, Samuel Piette is not as old as you think. Samuel Piette feels like he's 35. I think Samuel Piette played 8-1 Honduras, right? So that makes me feel like he was a solidified regular then, which would make him well into his 30s now.
Well, he's 29.
Okay, good. Well, there we go.
Yeah, which is absolutely shocking every time I say it. And I was stunned last night when I was reminded of that as well. We're actually recording on the anniversary of 8-1.
Way to bring that up.
Certainly different times.
Yikes. Yeah, I'm glad that we're in different times, guys. Very much so. It's nice that Canada are the team on the rise with World Cup qualification aspirations consistently instead of Honduras, which was the case back then in 2012. I'm very happy that we don't fear 8-1 results to Central American foes and the cauldrons that we might play in the middle of the day on swamp or golf destroyed pitches. It's nice that the sport has come this far. To your point about the golden generation and or Canada reaching this height while others seem to be at the bottom of a cycle or restarting a cycle. To one of Alex's points earlier, I started thinking about the best players in Concacaf, and I don't have a single Mexican player in there. I don't have a single Costa Rican or other Central American, and that feels crazy because I've got 3 Canadians and I got 2 Americans that would be in there in terms of the best CONCACAF players. Eustachio, Davies, and David.
Bombito. And then Bombito has to be in there. I think after the last 6 months, I think you're going to have to throw him in that discussion. At least in terms of a best 11, what other center backs are we putting in there in the region?
Yeah. Well, I'm not playing 5 aside. I'm just playing 5 of the best players in CONCACAF. So it's Pulisic's in there. So you either go 4-1 Canada, which is crazy. Crazy good. I'm not disagreeing with you that that's bad. Or if you're removing one of those Canadians, for me, the only other one that I consider, and he doesn't always play to his level, but I think he's exceptional, is Yunus Musa. I think he's the second best American.
I'd say McKennie. If you're going to put that, I think McKennie. I think Anthony Robinson did have a really good year last year for Fulham, and I liked watching what he did. And I think Edson Alvarez, he's had a lot of injury troubles, but I don't think you can remove him from that discussion quite yet.
The final
I think you could throw
for
Raul
McKennie
Jimenez.
Well, right now in terms of form, Raul Jimenez is up there again. That goal he scored yesterday against the U.S.
Yeah, wild. It's great just to see him back and playing, let alone being a lead again and being a leading and a star man. It's great. McKennie, for me, Unai Emery didn't want him. And I think that when you talk about overhyped Americans, Weston McKennie is one of the faces of that, if not the face of that phrase to me.
The problem with McKennie is that he needs a kick in the ass. So he has these 6-month cycles where for 6 months he's unbelievable. Like I watched him recently for Juve because Champions League, I think they were a standalone. I threw him on. I'm like, why is McKennie like dominating out here? He's great. And then he'll have 6 months where he looks absolutely terrible because he gets complacent. Maybe he's eating too much of that ranch that that Chiellini once gave him stick over. I don't know what it is. Something just he seems to get complacent. He falls, and then it's like a cycle. Like they almost joked about it because he was obviously left out of Pochettino's squad with a bit of an injury, and they were kind of joking like Pochettino's studied McKennie. They know the best way to get out of him is to pretend like he's not in their plans anymore. Like every year he seems to be at Juve, and then he's a starter by October.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great point. He seems like one of those players that his trajectory can go one of 2 ways. That he can either become a Dele Alli in the next couple of years and to completely fall off, or someone who's constantly like battling for their spot, earns it every year, and then it's still a question mark, and then ends up in MLS like Michael Bradley in his mid to late 20s.
So a pretty typical American timeline. No. Given enough shots to
I think to get back to the question, a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it has to do with just the growth and the structure of the game in Canada and the US for comparable as well. Both experiencing, a so-called golden generation because there's systems for these players to come through, whether that is the CPL, whether that is the MLS academies. Yes, it could be a lot better in Canada and it could be more structured like it is in the US where, there is the MLS Next Pro setup, there is the MLS Next setup, and that, USL setup goes far reaching as well. Yes, there's pay to play. Yes, there's all of this, stuff that makes it not so great, but there's a structure there, which there hasn't been before. And so there's the growth and popularity of soccer. There's more athletes, young athletes choosing to play soccer. That is going to improve, just the baseline level player that you get, because, the best athlete isn't necessarily default going to go play football or basketball in the States. And I think, similar ways can be reflected in Canada, even though it's at a much different level. It's not the be all end all, but I think that's a major part of why this is happening. And that structure isn't necessarily there in Panama and Honduras, where they haven't necessarily changed the player development model since they were the strengths, and they were good through those strengths. Whereas now, the more structure is proving to be beneficial for Canada. And through that, you're getting the dual nationals because the baseline player has improved, and that just all lifts up the level continuously. And that's where we're starting to see, the soccer picture kind of reflect the political and economic picture in Concacaf, which it hasn't necessarily done before up until, modern times.
I think you do have to remember with Canada in this discussion that Canada is coming from a unique place where, like, for Canada, it wasn't so much the player pool is never the issue. Like, 'cause I think sometimes we talk about Canada like if there was no one playing soccer here, they were all playing hockey and that's it. Like, there was a lot of players in Canada. The problem is the professional infrastructure was severely lacking, especially in terms of, even when it was there, how do you get all the top players from grassroots to pro? So many guys falling through the cracks. So many guys, you hear about, so great, never got a look, or they only got a look because they went to Europe, and then you end up with, other guys too. So many dual nationals of Begoviches and de Guzmans and all these guys that ended up being developed here, but then they chose, other nations for various reasons. You throw Owen Hargraves in that mix. I think for Canada, in terms of economical potential, like, there's always been that potential of, man, if they just invest in soccer, given you've seen what it's done to invest in other sports, you could see the potential. It was about creating a pathway. And I think now what you're seeing is that they've always had a lot of potential. It's just for them, they were not using it the right way. Whereas for a lot of maybe these other nations in CONCACAF, it feels like, just based on the way it is, especially maybe it's population wise, they're not as big, or, economically, they might not have the same advantages that Canada might have, is that it's for them, even their golden generations, they're able to, just because they're not able to pump enough money into their league or other reasons, it's kind of put a cap. Whereas for Canada, now that they've finally removed this cap they've had on themselves for years, that all of a sudden it's been an explosion of there's a bunch of guys in top 5 leagues. There's more guys playing professionally than ever. And they're finally discovering the guys that were already there. So I think that's what it was for Canada, is that, the journey they had to go to get here wasn't as drastic as we feel like it was. Like, it feels like they put this ecosystem, they were literally converting everyone to soccer players. No, Canada soccer's always been one of the most played sports in this country and one of the most loved. Like, the soccer culture was already there.
And when you look at this question from Robin Glover at Rocket Robin 01, it was great to sit next to you at the match last night, which, always great to see, the local legend of Toronto, I would say. If you haven't, been around Toronto soccer, Rocket Robin is at every York United game. He used to be at every TFC game. He's at all the League One Ontario. Like, he's a bit of a local legend in Toronto soccer, and even got a question into Thomas Christensen last night, which Christensen kind of snapped back at, because Robin said, you've got all this pressure to make the World Cup, and Christensen was like, I hadn't thought about the pressure, but thanks for putting that on us, and the expectation. But Stalteri and Dero still involved in Canadian soccer. Toronto Lynx 1997 teammates. How will players of today stay in the game after their playing days end, Brennan?
How will players of today stay in the game? This is a good question. I think about Jordan Wilson being the lead analyst now on One Soccer, and someone who didn't have national team opportunities, who doesn't have top 5 league, big European country experience to talk about, but is a real personality, is a real thought-provoking voice, and a real entertaining guy. And I hope that there's a platform for more of those. I remember Sid Sixero saying when Sportsnet got the hockey deal about it feeling like there was one seat. Like, there was like Don Cherry And how come that was like the only guy that could be like a mouthpiece, essentially the Stephen A, if you will, right? The kind of the talking head. Like, why is there only one soapbox? There should be more. There can be. Why can't there be 5? And I feel like that with the coverage of Canadian soccer now, where I'd love to see another Jordan Wilson. Not that I have someone off the top of my head, a CPL graduate or a CPL star, let's say.
Nico Giantsopoulos is going to be great on TV whenever he decides to hang him up for the boots. I'll say that.
Yeah, I did some radio with him. We had a couple of games, or at least one day at least, in Qatar on TSN doing the national radio during the World Cup. So yeah, Nico Giantsopoulos is a great shout too, for sure. I'd love to see more guys involved, in media, because I love to hear guys. I think Daniel Henry is going to be a media star as well. And then I really like that someone like Salteri has been able to come home and work in multiple different jobs through the pandemic in the last 5 years, from York to TFC, now with the national team. I want to see more of that. For a really, really long time, Canada Soccer did a really shitty job of engaging with alumni just as people, let alone engaging them in football operations and engaging them in football program and using their experience. And it seems to me like they've not only recognized that, but they have really quickly begun ways to integrate some of this great alumni experience into the national program at different levels in different ways. So we spoke before about the youth program and the youth setup and how there being no synergy, and a lot of these coaching decisions were made by nepotism and people would stay in this position and there wasn't any connection between the groups. I would love for that to change. I would love to see more alumni being used in that setup, the same way, to use a club academy example. Toronto FC have used the academy here with from Dana Dicchio, Chris Pozniak to Terry Dunfield. It's great to see those ex-players kind of come through that system, and I hope that the national program can further do that and do that more.
Yeah, well, the ecosystem's there, right? Now we're finally getting a professional landscape for guys to retire, and they can become media guys. Say, like, we've seen, like with those names you mentioned, they can become executives, right? We've seen it in the CPL with some of those guys stepping into the front office, or, even in MLS. We've seen it in the coaching staff. I think it's huge, because in my head, I was about to say within the next 5 to 10 years, I predict that in the CPL, there's going to be some former national team players coaching. And then I remembered Nick Ledgerwood's already an assistant at Cavalry. And I feel like it's only a matter of time till we see him helm, be it Cavalry or somewhere else in the league, with his pedigree as a player and now as an assistant. David Edgar, you keep hearing great things about how he's adapted to Bobby Smirniotis' staff. We've seen it with Mauro Eustachio on York. Like, there's this ecosystem being created where more and more former players, as soon as they retire now, we've seen over the last 3 to 5 years, they can step in and stay in the game in Canada, be it with CPL, MLS, and now I think what we're seeing from Jesse Marsh and bringing in Eustachio. I don't know if anyone picked up too. Martin Nash got quietly brought in to the last camp, and I noticed him on TV yesterday. So he's been bringing in some names who are familiar with CPL and the national teams. And I have to imagine Marsh is going to keep looking at more former alumni. That's good, because it's creating these sorts of opportunities that maybe weren't there 5 to 10 years ago if you retired. And obviously we hear it a lot through guys like Craig Forrest being like, hey, no one ever called me from the national team about anything. And now we're starting to see that those kind of guys are getting calls to help out in ways they can. And that will extend to the growing club ecosystem.
100%. I want to see more and more of that. And are Martin Nash and Jimmy Brennan the only ex-Canadian internationals to have coached in the CPL? Am I missing somebody?
It's a good question. Stephen Hart, of course, ex-coach, but not ex-player.
Ex-coach, yeah. Stephen Hart of Rob Gale's Portland Thorns coaching staff.
CPL connection.
I was in Vancouver. And I do love to see that. Honestly, Rob Gale, of all the managers I dealt with in that Island Games year, Rob Gale was definitely one of the best. There's a lot of people that I value for having built relationships with and had some fantastic conversations with, and Rob Gale is definitely one of them. One of those people in Canadian soccer that I'm very, very happy to see continue to gain success, and someone that's really had to grind and do it in different places in different ways. It's awesome to see where he's got to.
And we'll jump into the women's national team as well. The Canadian women's national team named their first squad since the Olympics as they get set for an October 25th friendly against Spain. highly anticipated, this squad and the coaching announcement, which of course didn't include Bev Priestman, considering that she's still suspended by FIFA a few months into that suspension now. Not much to note. Only 21 players were called in, with Olivia Smith and Emma Reagan back in the squad after being left out of the Olympics. Jade Riviere, Quinn, and Desiree Scott are out. Quinn and Riviere both injured. Thoughts on only calling in 21 players? And we also saw, the moves in terms of the managerial side. We'll see Andy Spence and some returning names, but we'll also see Katie Collar, who Alex and I have gotten to know with the Whitecaps Girls Elite over the last few years and has done a tremendous job there. And of course, Diana Matheson in the picture as well as an interim assistant.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, to our point about using alumni and using the pathway and other Canadian names, voices, and minds that haven't had opportunities before. That to me has Kevin Blue and to a lesser extent Jesse Marsh, but that philosophy that they share all over it, and I love seeing those fingerprints.
No, I think it's Katie Collar for me. It's a great inclusion to see. I really hope she's involved in the NSL in some way, be it with the Whitecaps or the Rise. I guess we should get used to saying. Or of course, I'm sure Calgary will be having a look at her, given her links to the city. If the Rise don't end up, we'll see what ends up happening. So it's great to see her use this platform, and I'm curious to see now. In terms of the squad, I do feel like it was a bit boring for my taste, though. Yes, there's obviously a lot of turmoil off the field, for lack of a better word. Like, your main head coach is suspended. You kind of don't know what the future of the coaching staff is going to look like. And I get maybe on that regard, like, essentially this is the Olympic team. Like, the only players that were left out, Scott's played 60 minutes since the Olympics. So like, I think it was probably one where she's thinking we're nearing the end here, and Riviere and Quinn would have been in the squad had healthy. Like, they essentially ran it back from the Olympics, and while that's not a bad thing, they brought 10 players over 29 to the Olympics. Like, it's something where the next tournament's 2027. A lot of those players are going to be, entering the 32, 33, 34 the next cycle. Like, you got to start bringing in some youngsters for this next cycle, and I felt like it's a bit of a missed opportunity, because no matter if it's an interim, if it's not your head's coaching staff, I'm sure there very easily someone on the staff could have picked out a handful of names that they could have brought in. Like, for example, Geneva Hernandez Gray just had a great run with Canada, has already been in the camp. She's not in college. She just finished the CCC run. Wouldn't have hurt to bring her along maybe for this opportunity. Maybe there's some other Canadian youngsters in that Whitecap setup they were pleased with. They're in Europe. I'm sure they could have called in some of these promising young European players playing in France, playing in England, just to come and experience the camp. 21 just feels like such a missed opportunity, because no matter who the coach is, they've got to prepare for 2027. And it's hard to see 21 being enough for that.
Yeah, I would tend to agree that you still could have brought in some of those experimental players, even if they weren't going to get minutes, even if they're not, potential players down the line. They're still, significant players that you could bring in and get a taste. And, you can't even do 11v11 with 21 players, right? And we've heard the stories of the coaches.
Because Mary Yasmin Aladu,
we've heard the stories of the coaches
plays in Portugal. You're playing in Spain. You can't tell me you couldn't have thrown her on a bus to come at least help you fill numbers in training. Sorry to cut you off there.
I mean, we've heard the stories of the coaches jumping into training as well, and that'll have to happen again, I guess. Although Matheson is a quality player.
Maybe that's it. Maybe she's 22 to make up the numbers. That was it.
See Matheson play again for Canada would be quite the sight. From league executive back to rocking the number 8 shirt and just going.
Be quite the comeback. That'd be a pretty remarkable story. She'd need a book, I think.
Matheson signs as the inaugural NSL player for can't be on a team because she's the commissioner, so she's just going to play one game for every team in 2025.
It's like, she'll be like the only on the attacking team that you do when you don't have even numbers in like a scrimmage, that you're only allowed to be on the attacking team. And then you just switch whatever, and you get confused. So she'll be that in every NSL game. She'll only be on the attacking team. The neutral.
You're the neutral.
Exactly. And we'll quickly jump into MLS as well. Decision day this weekend. Montreal looking to clinch a spot in the postseason with at least a point against New York City FC or some help from the Philadelphia Union, Atlanta United, or DC United. With the Vancouver Whitecaps are looking to avoid an 8-9 play-in against RSL after a rough couple weeks. And the Whitecaps might have some complications if they finished 8th. Right, Alex?
Yeah, well, it sounds like they won't be able to. Well, they'll have some issues getting BC Place for a potential 8-9 play-in due to availability issues, just like they had issues for Champions Cup early in this year. So that's a big story to watch because, of course, they'd love to finish 7th and avoid the play-in. Yeah, it's going to suck playing LA, but hey, they've played them so much that maybe they'll see that as an advantage. You want to avoid the play-in because if you lose in the play-in, it feels like it erases so much of the goodwill you built up through this season in terms of flirting with being a top 4 team, winning another Canadian championship. So pretty big game this weekend, I think, for RSL, both in terms of their expectations as a team and also avoiding headache and potential embarrassment of whatever scenario could happen if they do end up in 8th place.
The Vanny out narrative on Twitter seems just ridiculous to me. But if they crash out in a wild card spot here, I think there's like legit consideration for it, which is unfortunate because I think he's been exceptional for that market, and I think that it's not necessarily his fault that this season hasn't gone the way that everyone had hoped and that Alex had predicted throughout the season that they've looked capable of it at points. But it does kind of feel like that would be the opportunity in the window to usher in some type of change. And I could see the club feeling some pressure to do so if they crash out in wild card.
And how about Montreal? Do you think they get it done this weekend and make their way into that play-in game in the East?
Yeah, I do actually. I've got a good feeling about Laurent Courtois' side. They perform pretty well with their backs against the wall, unlike some of the other Canadian MLS clubs. And I think that they recognize that and they pride themselves on that. And I also think they're catching New York City FC at the right time. So I think it stacks up in their favor to be at home as well. They've shown this year that it's not Stade Saputo is not the burden always that it's been in the past. When they find their footing, they're at home. They definitely make the most of that home cooking.
Yeah, and of course, we're going to have 3 of those 4 teams in the MLS Eastern Conference battling for those 2 playoff spots at home. So it's going to be an intriguing decision day in MLS, and then it's also going to be the outcome in the CPL, and couldn't get more exciting with the outcome in the CPL coming down to the final weekend. Pacific, Vancouver, and Valor all battling for the 5th and final playoff spot. York is locked into 4th. Cavalry and Ottawa are battling for 2nd, and Forge is secure after clinching the CPL Shield. Pacific hosts Forge, Valor hosts Cavalry, Ottawa hosts Vancouver, and Halifax hosts York. And the CPL final was also announced that it'll be on CBC television as well. So a busy week for the CPL, but who do you think gets that 5th playoff spot?
You know me, I got a soft spot for Vancouver. I hope they do it, Alex.
Yeah, interesting. I'd say Pacific. I think they just have too much of an advantage, and they've seemed the most balanced lately. Although, man, what a story it would be if Phil DeSantos' Valor scrapes in after everyone was predicting them to finish at the bottom of the table. But hey, only 3 losses in their last 13, so they've been picking up points.
That'll certainly be an exciting end to MLS and the CPL as well. And of course, a quick shout to Christine Sinclair, who scored against the Whitecaps Girls Elite. Alex, I know you were there last night as well.
Yeah, just special to be in the building for a Christine Sinclair goal. I think they said on the broadcast she hadn't scored at BC Place since 2015, which is just obscene that's the case. So it's been a long time coming. Like, she didn't score last year in the send-off. I don't think she really cared. Like, you could tell all her teammates really wanted her to score for Canada that one last time. Wasn't meant to be. But it was just good that it happened. It was a nice goal. Fell to her, volleyed through the keeper's legs, and just special moment to be there. And it was great because it meant we actually were able to talk to Sinclair after the game, because I know she's not always the most chatty, and that's her personality. That's what part of the reason what makes her such a fascinating star is that she's always had this averse to wanting to be in the spotlight, but her scoring, she couldn't avoid it, and it was great just to hear her reflections as she kind of nears the end of this club career. So just special night all around at BC Place.
That's all we've got for this episode of the Northern Football Podcast, episode 198 in the books. The CanMNT getting a win over Panama. The CanWNT getting set for a game against Spain as well. And of course, exciting weekend to come up in MLS and CPL. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast, rate, review, all that jazz. And you can also watch us on the 90th Minute on YouTube.